Thank you for joining our virtual fireside chat on the future of psychedelics with Ronan Levy, co-founder and executive chairman of Field Trip Health. The discussion will explore how biotechnology is propelling the psychedelic industry forward, and members will have the opportunity to ask any questions. So, some quick housekeeping notes. Please make sure to ask your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll open up an audience Q&A at the very end of this hour. So Ronan started his career as a securities lawyer at Blake, Castles and Graydon LLP, but left that after realizing he was much too creative for the profession of law. Since then, Ronan has helped launch businesses across a number of industries from gold to cannabis, and most recently in psychedelics, where he's a co-founder and executive chairman of Field Trip Health. He's a global leader in the development and delivery of psychedelic therapies. Welcome, Ronan. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. And I should make it clear, I'm not a global leader in the development and delivery of psychedelic therapies. Field Trip, which has many people much smarter and more capable than me, is trying to do that.
Perfect. So we'll dive into the first question everyone asks during these crazy times. How are you, and how have you been holding up during the pandemic?
Yeah, thank you. I'm good. I'm extremely sleep deprived, which has less to do with the pandemic and more to do with having a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old, and a very intense startup. But I'm doing great. The pandemic, early days, I shared, I think, the anxiety that the entire world was feeling across a number of different spectrums. But I had a good friend remind me that this was a unique opportunity in the world. That in the early days of the pandemic, we all kind of got a little bit of a break from our normal routine, and to use that to, really go deep and into myself and find out what motivates me and all that kind of stuff. And so that was a profound experience. And so even though the rest of the pandemic has had its challenges, it's actually been a period of pretty profound growth and insight for me.
Oh, definitely. You had some time during the pandemic, right?
That's
Hopefully you'll get
correct.
more sleep.
Yes, exactly. Maybe in a couple of years when my kids start sleeping through the night, but I'm doing okay, thanks.
Oh, good. So tell us a little bit about your career journey. How did you land at Field Trip Health?
Sure. So, as mentioned in my bio, I started off as a lawyer, but realized pretty quickly that was not the profession for me. So, progressively tried to get out of the practice of law. Certainly, securities law was not for me. I ended up working in-house at a pharmaceutical company, and then at actually Much Music and MTV, where I got a little bit of a taste for digital media and startup life and all that kind of stuff. So shortly after that, I started my first business, which was in the cold industry, mostly leaving the profession of law behind, but not entirely, because I couldn't actually pay myself from that company. So I kept doing some freelance legal work on the side to pay the bills. And through that, I met my business partners in my last business, which was Canadian Cannabis Clinics and Cannabis RX. Canadian Cannabis Clinics grew to become the largest network of cannabis specialized medical clinics in Canada. We sold that to Aurora Cannabis and helped that company grow from a small company to a big company. Left in 2018 and learned about what was happening with psychedelics from the research perspective, as well as from a social perspective. We had some meetings, we learned about the profound science that we're seeing around psychedelics, but what really hooked me to the fact that the world zeitgeist had already changed around psychedelics was the fact that, and this was almost 4 years ago now, there were 4 or 5 online stores openly selling magic mushrooms in Canada. Just websites selling magic mushrooms. They weren't, dark web. They weren't hidden. You didn't need a password. You could just log on and buy magic mushrooms. And then I was like, oh my God, the world's attitude towards psychedelics has changed. We just need to catch up to it. And so looking at the science, looking at the experience we just had with cannabis and just how profoundly it really improved people's lives from a medical perspective, we realized that there was an amazing opportunity to create incredible impact with psychedelics. And we had a unique skill set actually to bring into the psychedelic industry, having seen the Canadian cannabis industry basically from inception to full scale. So that's how we got started. And personally, I've always done a lot of work with meditation and coaching and therapy and all that kind of stuff for my own reasons. So I know just how impactful this work can be. And so it quickly became a passion of mine, even though at the time I had never really experienced psychedelics at all. So that's probably one question that would come up. But yeah, I'd never tried psychedelics up to that point.
Wow, so interesting. So, what do you think? You've had a lot of experience in a leadership role. What do you think makes a good leader?
It's a good question. I think leadership, it really depends. I think there's different forms of leadership that can be effective. What I uh, think provides for the most effective leadership are people who have a clear vision, um, who are unafraid to pursue that vision, as outlandish as it is, like starting a psychedelics company in 2018. Um, and then probably the most important skill set, which also coincidentally, and I'm probably sounding like a shill right now, but psychedelics really help enable is empathy. We've seen both firsthand as well as some evidence that managers, employers, CEOs who have a lot of empathy for their employees and understanding what they're going through tend to be able to draw out the best in their employees, because those employees feel trusted, they feel safe, they feel respected and valued, and thus seem to be inclined to work harder, go deeper, be more creative, and it really creates incredible outcomes. So being able to have a strong vision, a clear vision, and being incredibly empathetic, I think are the two most important qualities from my perspective.
Right. And what experience throughout your career have helped shape your leadership style?
Um, I think there was a period after I left CTV and before we started Canadian Cannabis Clinics that I was working for like an online dating company, and the CEO there he was just a savant in understanding the human condition and realizing that there's a lot more opportunity if you're just willing to open your eyes to it. And I think working with him, even though he had many flaws and was a bit of a narcissist on many ways, just changed my perspective of what the world needs and what the world is willing to accept. And it's actually a lot more embracing of bold ideas and people challenging the status quo than I think most people would think. And so even though I've always been a little bit of a contrarian my entire life, I think that really um, helps me step into the idea that the status quo is meant to be challenged and changed, and that's how progress happens. And so you shouldn't be afraid of it. And so I've really tried to build my career since then on finding ways that I can challenge the status quo in what I think is a productive, healthy way. I'm not suggesting there are certain taboos that are taboos for a good reason, but I think if you analyze a lot of the taboos and practices of our society, I think you'll find that a lot of them don't stand up to rigor very often. They're just the way things do. It does seem like inertia is the most powerful force in the human existence, and we get up and we do the same things every day and rarely ask questions. And I think being willing to ask questions is one of the biggest skills I learned from that experience.
That's so great. And do you find that you had a mentor along the way, or a few mentors that have really, helped guide you to where you are today?
No, actually, I grew up. I'm sorry, this is a bit of a sob story, but I grew up without a father. My parents divorced when I was really really young, and I basically had no relationship with my dad. And so all my life, I've craved like a mentor relationship, kind of fill in that gap that was there. And I never really had one, but in the absence of mentorship, I had great friendships. Wonderful, sincere, thoughtful, inspiring friends who have you know pushed me to try harder and forced me to do my best. And so it wasn't a mentorship relationship. It was just wonderful friendship.
No, it's so great to have. It's all about your circle. So
Totally.
that's so nice to hear. So let's go to, if someone is getting started in the industry or getting started in their own kind of career, what can you help, encourage? How can you help encourage those people in the next generation in becoming, professionals and wanting to get into this type of industry?
Yeah, two biggest pieces of advice are, don't wait for anything to happen. Go out and make it happen. I remember when I was practicing law at that pharmaceuticals company. I remember watching the MTV Video Awards and thinking, wow, those rock stars are probably partying like crazy, but I bet you like the lawyers and the bankers behind the scenes that we don't see are probably partying way harder. And I was like, you know what, I want to be in the entertainment industry. And that day I, picked up my computer and I emailed everybody I knew that was in the entertainment industry or was related to the entertainment industry, because I made the decision that day that I was going to find a way in. And truthfully, it took a long time, but lo and behold, 6 months later, out of the blue, a job opportunity opened up working for Much Music and MTV. And it really did feel like I had created that opportunity. That's what it felt like, whether there's any merit to that statement or not. It really felt that I willed that into existence. And ever since then, I've always been motivated by the idea of, will something into existence, put your heart and mind into it, and you'll make it happen at some point. The other big piece of advice I always like to give is that it's more important to be memorable than it is to be good, especially in a professional context. With bankers and lawyers and whatever the case may be, everybody sounds the same. We all have the same stories. We all have the same degrees. We all went to the same schools, like blah, blah, blah. And I remember when I was leaving private practice, just because I felt like doing it in the, I don't know if it's still commonplace right now, but on a CV, you used to have like an interests line, the things you were interested in to kind of humanize you outside of your professional experience. And I remember just being cheeky one day, I put one of my interests as dancing poorly. And you have no idea how many interviews I got because people read that and they're like, I just got to meet the guy who wrote dancing poorly on his CV. And it was remarkable because people were craving something that makes you stand out. And clearly I wasn't standing out because I was high quality at dancing. That was clearly not the case. And it still remains to this day that I'm a terrible dancer. But it made people say, stop and pay attention. And really, in a world where we're inundated with information, grabbing attention in little ways like that, not too clickbaity, but in a way that makes people smile, is such a powerful force. And it really took two words, and it opened so many doors for me. So those are the two things, which is like, make it happen. Don't wait for anyone to make it happen for you. And don't be afraid to stand out and be seen. It's important to be memorable these days.
It's so interesting when you say Much Music, because it's like you're probably working there during its heyday, right? And like when videos are just everything you watched on TV was all about music and music videos, right? And you couldn't wait till Friday night until the countdown was on. So it's so interesting to hear that journey of yours. It's crazy.
I love the Much Music countdown, but you're dating me a little bit. By the time I got to MTV and Much Music, it was probably 2009 when YouTube was taking over all music videos and people weren't watching Much Music very much anymore for music videos. So it was actually quite a challenging time, but I did love watching the Much Music countdown back in the day.
To bring it back. Right.
Yeah, we do. I think Much Music is now back on TikTok or something like that. I think there's, yeah, which is amazing. I haven't checked it out yet, but I'm keen to. I miss, I miss the days of having content served to you, like in this world with like Netflix and Spotify and Apple Music, where you get freedom of choice. You always got to make a choice, whereas with Much Music, you didn't have a choice. You got what they gave you, and either you liked it or you didn't, but at least it exposed you to a much broader world. And I think there's value in that these days.
Definitely. So what advice would you particularly give others entering the world of business? You touched on how you have, but for others that want to enter the world of business, what would you tell them?
I think the same advice holds true, which is like, go out and make it happen. We, especially in Toronto and Ontario and Canada, we live in a world where, where there's a lot of very talented, very educated people. And that's a wonderful problem to have, but it means that, you got to stand out. You gotta really show that, especially if it's a crowded space that a lot of people want to work in, like we're seeing with psychedelics, like we saw in the entertainment industry, like we saw in the cannabis industry. Um, you got to help make yourself stand out. So, doing things for free. Last year we had someone reach out who was keen to work with us at Field Trip, and he went out and he created a whole video and a whole website telling us about ways we can improve our website and our social media presence. And he did that on his own. He's like, here, this is for you. Take it, leave it. I don't care. I'm really interested in working for you. And I hope this shows you like my commitment and my interest. And I still remember that to this day, and he stuck his neck out. And I probably would have been way too shy, in my early 20s to do that, but he did. And I don't forget him. And I would love for one day to have him work for us. It didn't line up in that particular case, and he ended up in a great spot, but it was really cool to see someone kind of really put his shoulder into something and create something meaningful and thoughtful, and it showed his chops and his ambition, and we were genuinely impressed by it.
Very cool. So what ingredients make for a great entrepreneur?
I've often said the best entrepreneurs are usually a little bit less intelligent than the average person, because if you look at the statistics around entrepreneurship, odds are you're going to fail, which means you have to be irrational to think that you're going to buck the trend, because the statistics tell you otherwise, that you're not going to buck the trend. And so it's the people who are willing to be irrational and ignore the advice of everybody else that makes for a great entrepreneur. And whether you actually have to be less intelligent or not is probably not relevant, but you have to learn to be able to put aside the noise, because so many people will tell you that you will fail, and that it's a bad idea and that you shouldn't take the risk. And then it's sheer determination. It's really like that force of will, because there's a great graph. I forget exactly what it's called. It's like the trough of the entrepreneurial experience, where you start with irrational optimism. You've got the best idea in the world. It's going to be amazing. And then you hit your first challenges, and then you fall into irrational pessimism, because now everything's impossible. It can't be done. You're a total failure. Your ego starts yelling at you and reminding you of all the ways that you suck. And then you hit the bottom of that irrational pessimism. Two things happen. One is you give up, or you get through it and you get into the phase of informed optimism, which is you've worked through the challenges, you've worked through the tribulations, you've solved them. And now that good idea is not only good, it's now been validated to some degree. And it's a roller coaster. It really, for many people, it goes to the core of their identity when you hit some of those challenges. And so to make sure you don't fall off that bottom after the irrational pessimism, you've got to have a thick skin. You've got to have that determination of, I'm going to make this happen. So I think those two factors, and then of course, as we talked about, having a clear vision, being empathetic, so you can rally support and get people behind you, because no business really is ever made by a single person. All of those things are essential ingredients, but yeah, determination and a willingness to ignore all the people who will tell you no are probably the two most important features in an entrepreneur, in my mind.
Those are some great tips. So let's go into the tough question. What is Field Trip Health? What does
so we
do?
So we are what's called an integrated psychedelics business, and we call it an integrated psychedelics business because we have no better way to describe it. But let me do my best briefly. So we are in the midst of a psychedelic renaissance right now. There is so much interest scientifically, medically, and socially in psychedelics, particularly in cosmopolitan centers like Toronto and New York and LA and London, UK, and all those places. And there's good reason for this, which is the evidence around psychedelics. If you were of my age, having watched the Much Music Countdown, you probably had to endure many winners don't do drugs. This is your brain on drugs, advertisements about all the harms on drugs. Turns out the war on drugs was a huge political, philosophical, economic boondoggle. And I think most people are kind of wrapping their heads around that. And one of my favorite memes coming out of the US election last year was the one that said, "Congratulations to the drugs for winning the war on drugs." I think that was great. But we are in the midst of this renaissance, and it's because we're finding that psychedelics, when paired with therapy and supported properly, are not only incredibly safe, in fact, in many ways safer than cannabis, which I think many people generally regard as safe, they're also profoundly effective at treating any number of mental disorders, from depression to anxiety, to trauma, to PTSD. There's evidence around anorexia, all of these things. And they also seem to enhance a person's creativity and empathy and regard for the planet. So there's all these wonderful things that are happening with psychedelics when delivered properly. But the important thing with psychedelics is that you do it in the right place with the right support, right? Otherwise, you risk having a really challenging experience. And if you remember all of the Vietnam movies, again, dating myself, about don't do the brown acid, bad trips, that risk is way overblown, but it's not zero. And so with psychedelics, you want to do it in a place that's properly supported and designed to help someone have a positive experience. And so that's what we're doing with Field Trip. We're through Field Trip Health, our clinic division. We're building out clinics to deliver psychedelic assisted therapy, working with ketamine right now because it's an FDA and Health Canada approved drug, but fully anticipating that we'll be able to work with MDMA, which is street drug ecstasy for another term, psilocybin, magic mushrooms, and a host of other psychedelics in the next probably 3 to 5 years. And so we're operating in Toronto and New York and LA, Chicago, Atlanta, Houston, and continuing to expand and seeing really transformative, profound results of people who come in and have ketamine experiences with us. We're also working in the Netherlands, actually, where we're offering experiences with psilocybin because it's legal there. So that's Field Trip Health. On the other side is Field Trip Discovery, which is, we're talking about medicines that have been around, depending on how you want to describe it, for 50 years to thousands of years with psilocybin. It's been conventionally used in cultures and for spiritual purposes for eons. And they're really profound medicines, but it doesn't mean we can't do better. We've learned a lot scientifically, culturally, socially and we think we can actually enhance psychedelic medicines specifically for the treatment of mental health indications. I'm not talking about going to a party or a concert along those lines. I'm talking about medicine. And so through our Field Trip Discovery division, we're developing the next generation of psychedelic medicines, specifically focused on trying to shorten the duration of experience. The evidence around psilocybin is that it's profoundly effective at treating depression, but it's a really long acting experience. You're probably in a clinic for 6, 8, 10 hours, and you need professionals and doctors and all that kind of stuff. And so it becomes very expensive. So if you can not affect the efficacy of psilocybin, but shrink the duration, then you've got something that I think is really persuasive from a business perspective and a medical perspective. And so that's what we're doing through our Field Trip Discovery division is developing the next generation of psychedelic medicines.
Oh, that's so fascinating. So what inspired you to get into this industry in the first place?
It was, a function, what's the expression? Success in business and love depends mostly on timing. And so it was a little bit of that. As I mentioned, we had just left the cannabis industry. This was 2018. It had been an incredible ride. You don't very often get to see industries blow up so quickly like that. I was just a little too young to participate in the first tech boom in the late 90s and early 2000s. And so this was the next best thing in terms of where I was in my professional journey. And so we just left the cannabis industry. We're looking for something new to do. Wanted to have something with impact. And that's when we learned about the research around psychedelics. And so in 2018, what was happening was MAPS, which is a US nonprofit organization conducting clinical trials looking at MDMA assisted therapy for the treatment of PTSD, had just been granted breakthrough therapy designation by the FDA, which means the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration in the US, of which the DEA is actually a department, had decided that MDMA was so promising from a therapeutic perspective, they were accelerating the clinical trials around it. Like, how mind-blowing is that? It really, it's so exciting. And so it was 2018, MAPS had just been granted breakthrough therapy designation. Michael Pollan, the author, had just published a book called How to Change Your Mind, all about him, in his, I think it was early 60s, going and having psychedelic experiences with psilocybin and LSD and MDMA and DMT and recording it, and writing a book about it. And the book was just flying off the shelves. There's so much excitement around it. And we just happened to have the right conversation actually with a Toronto entrepreneur named Judy Bloomstock, who is exploring working in the psychedelic space as well. And she kind of filled us in about Michael Pollan and MAPS. And as I mentioned before, these online sites openly selling psilocybin mushrooms. And I was just blown away by the fact that this was all happening. I don't know how I had missed it. Working in the cannabis industry, you'd figure psychedelics would be on your radar, but they weren't. And then, at the end of that meeting with Judy, her company is called Diamond Therapeutics, if you want to check it out. She said, a single psilocybin assisted therapy session is like 10 years of therapy in an afternoon. And as a person who, for my own reasons, has done a lot of therapy work and coaching work, and knows how transformative it has been for my life, I was like, oh my God, if there's any truth to that whatsoever, even if it's a gross exaggeration, if psychedelics are the platform that can get more people, men in particular, because men are particularly bad at being honest and feeling and expressing their emotions, but not limited to men by any stretch. But if we can get more people to tap into their emotions and learn to process and express their emotions, I could not create more impact. Like, in my mind, and I still believe this to this day, that the scale of the impact that we are going to have with psychedelics and through Field Trip is going to be on par with what Elon Musk is doing with Tesla and SpaceX and the Boring Company and revolutionizing transportation and space travel. I think it's going to be on that level of impact. It really is about elevating human consciousness. It's not just about treating depression and anxiety and PTSD and all these mental health challenges. It is certainly in part about that. But what we're really talking about is the elevation of human consciousness, opening the mind to much greater expanses. If you look at the studies, and I can't remember if this is one of the questions in the future, so I apologize if I'm shortcutting some of the questions, but when you look at the studies of what happens, they've taken people, they've given them psilocybin, and they put them in an fMRI machine, a functional magnetic resonance imaging machine that looks at how your brain is, the brain activity. Your brain, not on psilocybin, it's a pretty uninspiring picture, to be quite honest. When you have psilocybin in your bloodstream, when your brain is responding to psilocybin, it is lighting up. So many parts of your brain are talking to each other that never talk to each other. It's the reason that people seem to have such profound emotional or intellectual or creative breakthroughs, is because your brain is just working that much more efficiently and talking to parts it never talks to otherwise. It's really, really amazing. And so as we saw all of that, we're like, we just got to be a part of this. This is too important. This is too meaningful. This is too impactful. And we're pretty well cut out for it because what we just built in the cannabis industry as well. So that's how we got into psychedelics.
That's so amazing. So what would you say are the stigmas around psychedelics right now?
Yeah, the stigmas are really about the bad trip, there's still some people who believe that if you do LSD 5 times, you'll be clinically insane, and that's the, excuse the language, bullshit we were fed in school. Even Rick Doblin, who's the founder of MAPS, the organization conducting those clinical trials, he still believed that until his early 20s, that if he had done LSD 5 times, he would be clinically insane. Nothing could be further from the truth, psychedelics are incredibly safe. You know, the risk of overdose with LSD or psilocybin, a little bit less so with ketamine, a little bit less so with MDMA, but also with ketamine is virtually non-existent. You can't overdose on it. The risk of having a negative psychological break is actually quite low, provided you're doing it in the right context, in a setting with professional support. The risk of a bad trip, the current belief is that there's no such thing as a bad trip per se. There's only challenging trips and easy trips. Easy trips speak for themselves. Challenging trips can become bad trips if not properly supported, but can also become the most cathartic and provide the greatest breakthroughs for people if properly supported. And so I think those are the stigmas that you'll go insane if you use them. Not true. That you'll have a bad trip and never be the same. Not entirely untrue, but the risks are severely exaggerated. And, with the exception of people who have severe bipolar or schizophrenia, the general understanding right now is that the risks are quite minimal from that perspective. Other than that, I think I'm a big believer that stigma does not survive in the face of data. And as the data continues to roll out, as these clinical trials continue to get completed, as we treat more and more people with profound outcomes at field trip, those stigmas are going to go away, and they're already going away. You just have to pick up the newspaper, and almost every day there's a new article about psychedelics or ketamine and everything that's happening. And I think that's shifting the tides really quickly. And certainly the fact that, we've legalized cannabis in Canada and the sky has not fallen. And now I think 37 states have access to cannabis, either recreationally or medically. And lo and behold, the sky has not fallen. I think people are starting to recognize that maybe the stories we were fed around drugs at one point may be exaggerated. That's not true about all drugs. I think there's still severe risks with some of the harder drugs. So I'm not standing here saying like you should just go out and do any drugs. That's not the case at all. But as it pertains to psychedelics, the general evidence suggests a pretty significant degree of safety when done properly.
That makes sense. So to that point, how does field trip health build trust in this sector?
We just show great results. We get out there and we talk to people and we be honest about what we know and what we don't know. But most importantly, we just show really fantastic results, and we're already seeing it. We just did an update on the first kind of 150 patients that went through a field trip health location. And what we saw is that those patients, besides having subjectively transformative experiences, we've heard just amazing stories, like a military veteran who had lost the capacity to feel empathy, feeling empathy for people again, a sexual trauma survivor being able to look in the mirror and see herself as beautiful again. Beyond those amazingly powerful subjective stories, objectively, we're seeing on average, a person who has severe depression. So one of the scales of measuring depression is called the PHQ-9 scale. And we've seen people on average go from a PHQ-9 score of 17, which is severe depression symptoms, down to 6, which is mild depression symptoms. And this is after 4 to 6 ketamine treatments when paired with psychotherapy. Those benefits have lasted for, we're seeing up to 4 months or longer. So as far as I'm aware, and I'm totally not objective here, and I totally get that, but as far as I'm aware, there is no more effective depression treatment available anywhere in the world right now than what we're offering when we see those kind of benefits. The evidence around psilocybin suggests that will be even greater when that becomes available, but working with ketamine versus conventional antidepressants or SSRIs, orders of magnitude more effective. And just to dispel any notions around ketamine, because certainly when I found out about ketamine, I was like, about the horse tranquilizer. That's often like the perception and worry about like it being a party drug and K-holes. Ketamine is one of the safest pharmaceutical drugs that we use, period. It's been, the World Health Organization has declared it an essential medicine. It's so important for its anesthetic purposes. if you have children, and I was just on a call with a pediatrician who wanted to emphasize this in that particular call. I'm going to emphasize it here. If you have children and your child breaks an arm or has a bad cut that needs to be sutured, odds are they're going to give ketamine to your kid as an anesthetic as opposed to any other anesthetic. It's that level of safety that it's usually given to children as a first line anesthetic. So, what we're talking about is great results and incredible safety profiles associated with ketamine. There is a small risk of addiction with ketamine if you take it chronically, the way we do it, which is episodic, 4 to 6 times over a few weeks and then a long break. There's virtually no risk of addiction. So when you think about the harms of drug, of either overdose or addiction, they're both virtually non-existent when it comes to the treatments we're offering with such profound results. It's really hard not to be incredibly excited about what we're seeing.
Wow. So, psychedelics are becoming so mainstream right now. Our latest issue of Toronto Life is all about psychedelics. So, you see TV shows like Nine Perfect Strangers really exploring this sector and the conversation, and actually starting a brand new conversation in mainstream media. So how would you position your services to become even more mainstream than they are right now?
I think, like I said, we just got to keep doing what we're doing and having these conversations. Just as another nod to Toronto, the great Canadian, although I guess maybe he's American now, actor William Shatner has a new show called I Don't Understand with William Shatner, where he interviews people on subjects that he doesn't understand. And so I recorded with him yesterday. We did an episode on psychedelics. So, just continuing to get out there, continuing, I think, really to emphasize that psychedelics are real options for normal people, right? Because there is, I guess, one of the stigmas that exists are twofold. One is psychedelics are for, patchouli smelling hippies is the way that one person referred to it to me. And that's not the case. The people coming into our clinic just upstairs, they are doctors, they are lawyers, they are teachers, they are grandparents. They are the people you walk through on the street and would never bat an eye at because they're just average people. And the second thing that, is that people have these transformative experiences and they don't pick up and move to Peru and become a shaman. They go home, and what happens is they're able to be better parents. They're able to be better partners. They're able to be more empathetic. It really is. They feel honestly just more connected to themselves, more in control, less anxious, less stressed. And when you enable people to do that, they just live happier lives, and then the people around them get the benefit of that elevation as well. And so how do we continue to position it? We continue to have conversations. We continue to treat people. We continue to show great results. And I think the rest will quite literally take care of itself.
So great. So what do you foresee in the future of healthcare in general and in this sector?
Yeah, I think the future of healthcare. So over the last 100 years, we've largely lived in an allopathic medical system, meaning that our doctors focus on treating what's wrong and trying to get us back to baseline. And that's been a very effective approach. We see people living longer, healthier lives, which is wonderful. But I think we're kind of hitting the limits of what allopathic care can achieve, and now that's shifting to more functional medicine or integrative medicine, where it's not just about fixing what's wrong, it's also about amplifying and enhancing what's right. We see it in all of the exhortations of of our teachers and our governments to say, like, eat properly and exercise, right? Like, that's part of functional medicine. It helps you live longer. It helps you feel better and be happier and stay stronger and all of these things. That's always been in a physical health paradigm. And now I think that's shifting a little bit to the mental health paradigm. We think about, we all know that going to the gym helps us live longer and be stronger and healthier. Not all of us do it, but no one doubts that, right? Being proactive about it is a good thing. people don't generally think that way about their mental health. They usually are reactive. Oh, I'm depressed. Oh, I'm anxious. Oh, I had the loss of a loved one and I don't know how to deal. If we can just shift that to being proactive, like we think about our physical health, so that we're actively enhancing our emotional resilience, actively working through our traumas and our stresses, not only are we going to be happier and I think better people, to be quite honest, it actually translates to better physical health as well. We know that gut health and brain health are related, and that kids who have an intense traumatic experience in childhood have different gut flora than people who don't, right? So it's all connected. We're seeing like the interconnectedness of mind and body more and more. And so I think you'll see the shift to more integrative, proactive, functional medicine that focuses on your mind and your brain, hopefully as much as your body, or even puts it first, that we focus on treating your mental status, your mindset first, because the trickle down effects are significant, to the point where, you know, a person who is experiencing depression on average consumes 40% more medical resources than someone who doesn't experience depression. That's expensive. That's time consuming. You know, it's not pleasant for probably anybody involved. So you can see how the benefits start to scale up and up, and it creates a really virtuous cycle. So I think that's what we're going to see over the next 10, 20 years. And I think psychedelics are going to play an important part of that evolution.
Wow. Yeah. And do you see any changes in field trip health in general? What do you see in the future? What's next for field trip health?
We are just going to continue to execute on our strategy, which is building the clinical infrastructure, providing the setting for amazing psychedelic assisted therapy sessions. We've got 9 locations presently. We're hoping to scale to in the neighborhood of 75 locations over the next couple of years, and really try to become the gold standard of this kind of care, because what we don't want to see is a whole bunch of people just giving people ketamine and sending them home. I mean, it's not that dangerous, but it's not going to lead to fantastic outcomes. And so we really want to step up the game, and set the baseline of how these therapies get delivered, and then also advance our drug development efforts. You know, our first novel psychedelic FT104 is going to enter phase 1 clinical trials next year, and I think there's a lot of excitement about that and what it will do to facilitate access around psychedelics and making them more approachable. So that's it. And then, you know, the more times I can get on TV with William Shatner, the happier I'll be.
That's so exciting. Where can we find the show?
I don't know, actually. I mean, I don't have much time for TV, so I had no idea he had this program, but they reached out to us. So as soon as I get details about when it's going to air, I will be sure to pass it along to the good people at Toronto Life.
For sure. Let us know. Thank you. So before I ask my very last question, I'd like to remind everyone to ask their questions in the Q&A box. I see a couple here already. I'm sure a lot of people have some questions. So for you, Ronan, once the pandemic is fully over, what's the first thing you're going to do?
I really want to take a year off and just travel with my wife and kids. That's kind of my ambition. I'm guessing just kind of where field trip is right now and where the pandemic is, that's probably still a year or two away. But that's what I've got my heart set on. I did get to go. I traveled for the first time since February of 2020. A couple of weeks ago, I got to go to Los Angeles for the Code Conference, which is a big tech conference. And I got to ask some questions of Elon Musk and his perspectives on psychedelics. Elon Musk is pro-psychedelic. I don't know if people think that's a good thing or a bad thing, but at least it's a voice out there. And meet some really incredible people. And it was really, really delightful to just get away from the pandemic routine and feel a little bit of normalcy. So a little bit more of that would be good. But in terms of like big things, yeah, take a year off and go see the post-pandemic world.
That's a nice goal. I miss traveling too. So I hope you get to take that year off very soon.
Thank you.
Okay, so on to some questions from the audience. There's a question from Kim. Are you using these for therapeutics for the comorbids of autism?
There is some evidence around psychedelics and autism. It's still preliminary, but it is quite encouraging. In our clinics right now, given that the use of ketamine is off-label, meaning that ketamine is specifically approved for anesthesia, it's not specifically approved for mental health. It's totally legal to be using it in this context, but it is still off-label and therefore does get a little bit more scrutiny. We aren't treating anyone below the age of 18 right now, just doing the cost benefit analysis around some of the, not a whole lot of uncertainties. It just generates a lot more scrutiny. And given the nascent stage and the stigma, we think it's just appropriate to not treat people under certain ages. Not that only people under 18 are the ones who suffer from autism, but that's where the research has been. And so I think that's coming, but it's not something we're currently treating primarily at Field Trip.
Right. So a question from Claire, does it help with PTSD?
Yes. So I don't know if that's specific to ketamine or psychedelics. We do have a protocol that we've developed specifically for trauma with ketamine at Field Trip. It's a little bit more intense and supportive than a typical depression treatment, so to speak. So yes, we do treat PTSD and trauma. We've worked with a number of military veterans so far, but the real excitement for PTSD is with MDMA. That MAPS trial I mentioned before, in their phase 3, they found that after 3 MDMA assisted therapy sessions, close to 70% of participants no longer qualified as having PTSD, and that followed for 6 months post-treatment. So it's pretty close to being an effective cure. We can't say it's a cure because, maybe a year, 2 years, 3 years, people start to develop PTSD symptoms again. But as a statistical endpoint, it's as close to a mental health cure that you get. It's incredibly exciting. And the incredibly exciting thing is the number actually improves with time. People seem to get better and better with time, not worse with time. So once MDMA is approved, I think it's going to be a true revolution in how PTSD is treated. And I know people talk about disruption and revolutions all the time. This is a real disruption. This is a game changer, next order level magnitude efficacy when it comes to PTSD treatment.
So this is a great question from Julia. Ari, Field Trip, could you elaborate on your business model? Have you built into your business any leeway to make your services more accessible to the broader, more diverse audience?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's something that we continually reflect on. So right now, particularly for Canadians, we're not very used to paying for healthcare. All of our services are out of pocket. It's about $750 per session, so it's not inexpensive. When you line it up as against the cost of conventional treatments, the cost comparison is actually quite comparable, but it's a lot more money up front, which I get is problematic. We're certainly exploring ways to make it more accessible. We don't have a perfect answer yet, but for example, we've launched group offerings now, or community offerings now, which cuts the cost in half. And for many people, it actually enhances the experience because they prefer to do it in a community or group setting as opposed to on a one-on-one basis. We are exploring ways to also, direct a portion of proceeds and revenues to supporting marginalized communities and low-income communities. At this point in our evolution, given how much cash we're burning just trying to grow and build, we don't have a lot of capacity for that yet. But hopefully we'll be in a place to do so soon. And then we're also actively working to seek insurance coverage and reimbursement, which I also acknowledge still misses a lot of the people who probably need this most. But I don't think there's any one silver bullet. I think it's just, hacking away at solving the problem around accessibility for this treatment. And I think we'll get there, but we've got a long way to go. There's no doubt about that.
Right. So speaking of accessibility, what's your vetting process? We have a question here from Bernie. Said, can anyone come to Field Trip to get treatment? What's the process? Just wants to know if there's, different price points. Can you just go on the website and see if you're, even eligible to receive the treatment?
So in Toronto, we can't treat anybody. The guidance from the College of Physicians and Surgeons says you have to be treatment resistant mental health condition or have a treatment resistant mental health condition, which means you've tried 2 conventional therapies that have failed. Then we can explore ketamine assisted therapy with you. If that is you, even if that's not you and you want to go through the process, we're unlikely to treat you if you haven't tried 2 approaches already. What happens though is we do a psychiatric screening to make sure that our psychiatrists feel confident that ketamine assisted therapy is an appropriate treatment option. Most of the time it will be. There aren't a lot of contraindications with ketamine, but there are some. And then, we'll also screen, not really a screening, but you'll meet with your therapeutic team to make sure it's a good fit for you in terms of an interpersonal level. And that tends to be the screening process. So no, you can't just walk in off the street. And no, you can't just come in for, a ketamine experience like you may go for, I don't know, a massage or just like a therapy session. It is a bit more rigorous than that. In the US, we have more flexibility. Most mental health challenges, something like adjustment disorder or burnout, are valid conditions to treat. And again, we'll do the screening to make sure ketamine's safe and appropriate, but it does open it up to a wider array of conditions that we are willing to treat.
Great. So someone asked, curious on whether Big Pharma is exploring this and the implications of what this means for the traditional medicine. What does this displace?
Traditional medicine has a number of different meanings, particularly within the psychedelic community. So I'll answer that in 2 ways, just to make sure I cross off both. Is Big Pharma exploring this? Yes, Big Pharma is exploring this already. They're very actively watching it. Compass Pathways, which is a company that's conducting clinical trials with psilocybin assisted therapy, got a big investment from a Japanese pharmaceutical manufacturer, Otsuka Pharmaceuticals, and certainly we've had various conversations with other pharma companies who are interested in what's happening. Does it displace traditional medicines? Does it displace SSRIs and antidepressants? Yes, I think it does, and I personally, based on what I've seen around the evidence, I think that's a good thing, which is antidepressants and SSRIs don't work for most people, and they often carry a lot of bad side effects. And it means you're taking a pill every day, which I don't think most people want to do if they have the choice. Does it displace, some of the traditional uses of psilocybin in particular, the sacred and plant-based medicine approach to it? I don't think so personally. I think what you're going to see evolve is 2 parallel systems. In the state of Oregon in 2020, they actually legalized psilocybin therapies using the mushroom and made it available to anybody who wants it, as long as you don't have a contraindication. So it's kind of a hybrid between a recreational model and a medical model. It's recreational in that there's no medical need required, but it's recreational in that regard, but it's more medical because it has to be done in a licensed facility with a licensed supervisor. So you're not just taking mushrooms and running around the streets. And I think that enables a lot broader access. Does it preserve the traditional approaches to it? To some degree. I mean, there's a lot more flexibility for the guides in Oregon to provide a more traditional approach as opposed to a more medical approach. But I do think you'll see increasingly traditional and sacred uses be protected. In the US, peyote within Native American tribes is protected and they're allowed to use it. There are some religious groups in Canada who have been granted access to use ayahuasca for ceremonial and ritualistic purposes. So I think there will be, I won't say sufficient, but there will be some protections in place for the traditional uses of these medicines.
This is great. So this is a perfect final question. Do you have any links that you can share in terms of study for MDMA? Any books you would recommend for our audience today? Anything that you'd like to share with us?
Sure. For MDMA, just go to the MAPS website, maps.org, and you'll see all of the clinical studies they've done and the results. They are I think the only organization actively studying MDMA right now. I'm not 100% sure of that, but they're certainly the most advanced. And because they're a nonprofit committed to open science, all of their results are available for anybody to read, which is fantastic. Um, Books to read. Michael Pollan's How to Change Your Mind is a fantastic firsthand account of these experiences that goes in depth into the history and science. I'd certainly start there. I was a big fan of the Harvard Psychedelic Club. If you're interested about how I've always been a big fan of Woodstock and the hippie movement and all that kind of stuff. And so Harvard Psychedelic Club is a great book on that. Like the Timothy Leary, Richard Alpert, everything that happened in Harvard and how it kind of transmuted into society. Despite some concerns about some of her behaviors, Consciousness Medicine by Françoise Borzat is a fantastic book about a lot of the practice around psychedelics and how it's being used for therapeutic purposes. I'm sure there's countless other books I could recommend, but none are coming top of mind right now. But I'd be happy to provide a list subsequently for anybody who's interested.
That would be wonderful. Thank you so much, Ronan. So this takes us to the very, very end of this hour. Thank you so much for joining us today, Ronan. I really enjoyed this chat. I could talk to you for hours, so we could keep going if you want to. But
I'm game. I got to catch a flight in about 3 hours, but I got time between now and then.
Perfect. So thanks again. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Please make sure to tune in to our future fireside chats. We have a lot coming up next week, so make sure to check your inboxes and have a great rest of your day, everyone. Be safe and see you soon.
Thanks everyone for listening. I appreciate your attention.